Britain's workers are experiencing something that would shock previous generations. They're earning less in real terms than they did 15 years ago. While median weekly pay sits at £728 in 2024, that figure hides something worse. When you adjust for inflation, the typical British worker has barely recovered from the financial crash of 2008. This isn't just a temporary setback, it's become the new norm for millions of families across the UK. The numbers expose a reality economists once thought impossible in a developed nation. Between 2008 and 2019, median real wages in Britain went nowhere. The Institute for Fiscal Studies documented something unprecedented, an entire decade where the typical worker saw no improvement in their purchasing power. Previous generations expected wages to grow by around 2% each year. That expectation died with the financial crisis. Then came the pandemic, creating noise in the data as furloughs and job losses concentrated in low-paid sectors made average wages appear to rise. But this was an illusion, like thinking you're taller because everyone around you is sitting down. Reality struck when inflation exploded in 2021. Consumer prices hit 11.1% in October 2022, the highest level since the early 1980s. Food prices jumped even higher, rising 19.1% by March 2023. Energy bills became a national crisis, with the government forced to cap them just to prevent widespread hardship. Workers watched their pay packet shrink in real terms month after month. Even with nominal wage growth of 5.6% in late 2024, the damage from 2 years of rampant inflation meant real wages were still playing catch-up. The national living wage rose to £11.44 in April 2024 and expanded to cover workers aged 21 and over, providing crucial support at the bottom of the income distribution. The proportion of low-paid jobs fell to a record 3.4%, but these gains at the bottom couldn't hide the stagnation affecting the broad middle of Britain's workforce. Here's what everyone wants to know. Does Britain stand alone in this mess? The answer surprises most people. The OECD Employment Outlook shows that 16 of 35 OECD countries still had real wages below pre-pandemic levels in early 2024. The inflation shock that hammered Britain also struck Germany, France, and the United States. Workers everywhere felt the squeeze as energy and food prices soared. But wait, Britain's problems run deeper than a temporary inflation spike. Since 2008, the UK ranks among the worst performers in the G7 for median wage growth. Germany experienced wage restraints in the 2000s through the Hartz reforms, but then bounced back with strong growth in the late 2010s. The United States, despite high inequality, delivered robust nominal wage growth at the lower end of the distribution from the late 2010s onwards. France maintained its social model with stronger wage protection. Even Japan, long synonymous with stagnation, has started seeing nominal wage gains. Italy provides perhaps the closest parallel to Britain's experience. Italian real wages fell more than any other major OECD economy after the pandemic, dropping nearly 7% below pre-crisis levels by early 2024. Both countries share a toxic combination of weak productivity growth and structural economic problems. But here's the difference. Italy's issues stem partly from Eurozone constraints. Britain chose its own path through austerity and Brexit. The UK isn't experiencing something completely unique, but it sits firmly in the bottom tier of advanced economies for wage performance. Among the G7, only Italy keeps Britain company at the bottom. This isn't where Britain expected to end up when it was the world's first industrial nation. Want to understand why Britain's wages stagnate? You need to examine productivity, the amount of output produced per hour worked. Before 2008, UK productivity grew steadily at around 2% annually. After the crisis, it collapsed to near zero growth for years. This productivity puzzle obsesses economists and policymakers because wages ultimately depend on productivity. Workers can only earn more if they produce more value. Andy Haldane, former Bank of England chief economist, diagnosed the problem in his hub no-spokes analysis. Britain has world-class frontier firms, companies at the cutting edge of technology and efficiency. But then there's the problem. A long tail of low productivity businesses that struggle to adopt basic improvements. These laggard firms drag down the national average like anchors on a ship trying to sail forward. The failure to spread best practices from leading firms to the rest creates a two-speed economy. London's financial services and tech sectors compete globally, while much of manufacturing and services operate with outdated methods. Small businesses particularly struggle, lacking resources to invest in training, technology, or better processes. What you get is an economy where the best keep getting better while the rest fall further behind. Business dynamicism has declined markedly, fewer new companies challenge incumbents, and zombie firms that should fail stay alive through low interest rates. This reduces the competitive pressure that historically drove productivity improvements. When inefficient companies can survive indefinitely, nobody needs to improve. Investment provides the foundation for productivity growth, yet Britain consistently ranks bottom of the G7 for investment as a share of GDP. In the third quarter of 2024, UK gross fixed capital formation was just 18.1% of GDP, the lowest among major economies. This isn't temporary, it's been happening for decades. Private business investment collapsed after the 2016 Brexit referendum. Uncertainty about future trading relationships, regulatory frameworks, and market access made companies freeze their spending plans. The OBR documents how non-dwellings investment, covering factories, machinery, and equipment, underperformed significantly relative to other G7 nations from 2016 and onwards. Public investment tells the same depressing story. Years of austerity meant infrastructure spending was repeatedly cut or delayed. Transport networks aged without adequate maintenance or expansion. Digital infrastructure lagged behind European and Asian competitors. Skills training budgets shrank just when retraining became essential for economic adaptation. Think about what happens next. Low investment means lower productivity, which means lower profit, which means less money available for investment. Breaking this cycle requires either external funding or a dramatic shift in business confidence. Neither has happened at the scale needed. Research and development spending particularly lags, limiting innovation that could drive future productivity. Politicians talk about becoming a science superpower, but actual R&D investment remains well below leading nations like South Korea, Israel, or even Germany. Without innovation, British firms increasingly compete on cost rather than quality or uniqueness, a race to the bottom that crushes wages. Brexit adds another layer to Britain's wage problems. The OBR calculates trade intensity, the sum of imports and exports relative to GDP, fell by 15% compared to what would have happened without leaving the EU. Lower trade means less competition, less specialization, and ultimately lower productivity. The pound's depreciation after the 2016 referendum raised import prices by an estimated 2.9%, costing the average household £870 by mid-2018. For workers, this meant an immediate hit to purchasing power that preceded the later inflation crisis. Everything from food to fuel became more expensive overnight, but wages didn't adjust to compensate. Beyond the direct price effects, Brexit reduced the economy's potential. Financial services largely maintained access to European markets, but manufacturing hit new barriers. Supply chains that operated seamlessly across borders now face customs checks, regulatory divergence, and uncertainty. Small exporters particularly struggled with the bureaucracy, with many simply abandoning European markets. Remember those promised benefits of Brexit? New trade deals and regulatory freedom haven't boosted wages. Trade agreements with distant countries can't replace the depth of integration with neighboring markets. Regulatory divergence creates costs for businesses operating internationally. The UK labour market lost access to European workers just when many sectors faced acute shortages. Some argue immigration suppressed wages, but evidence says otherwise. The Migration Advisory Committee's review found no evidence that European immigration reduced average wages for UK-born workers. At most, there were small effects at the very bottom of the distribution. The bigger impact came from losing access to workers in key sectors like health, hospitality, and agriculture, forcing some businesses to reduce operations rather than raise wages. Britain's wage problems also reflect choices about labour market institutions. Union membership crashed to 22.4% in 2023, the lowest level on record. Without collective bargaining, individual workers have zero leverage to demand pay rises even when companies are profitable. Power shifted decisively towards employers. Public sector pay policy showed this shift clearly. A 2-year pay freeze from 2011 to 2013 was followed by a 1% cap until 2017. Inflation exceeded these limits every year, meaning real terms pay cuts for millions of teachers, nurses, and civil servants. The government, as the country's largest employer, set an example that private employers eagerly followed. The national living wage became the main tool for supporting low earners, rising faster than inflation and median wages. By April 2024, it reached £11.44 per hour and covered all workers 21 and over. This policy succeeded in reducing low pay to record lows. with just 3.4% of jobs paying below 2/3 of the median wage. But here's the catch. Minimum wage policy can't solve median wage stagnation. It creates a floor, not a ladder. For workers in the middle of the distribution, earning too much to benefit from median wage increases but lacking the bargaining power to secure raises, wage growth depends entirely on their employer's goodwill and the overall state of the economy. The gig economy expanded rapidly, offering flexibility but little security. While officially self-employed, many gig workers control nothing about their work and earnings. They absorb all the risk of employment without any of the benefits. Businesses love minimizing costs, but workers get stuck with income volatility that makes financial planning impossible. Universal credit replaced a complex benefit system but created new problems. The 5-week wait for initial payments pushed many into debt. The taper rate, reducing benefits as earnings increase, creates effective marginal tax rates exceeding 70% for some workers. Work doesn't pay when the government claws back most of what you earn. Wage stagnation hits differently across the country. London's median pay remains highest, but even the capital hasn't escaped entirely. The pandemic disrupted its productivity growth as finance and professional services adapted to remote work. Regional gaps persist, with median pay in the northeast and Wales significantly below the southeast. The collapse of traditional industries left lasting scars. Former mining areas never recovered from pit closures. Manufacturing cities that once employed thousands in secure, well-paid jobs now rely on distribution centers and call centers paying half as much. The new jobs that emerged rarely matched what was lost in terms of pay, security, or community pride. Service sector employment now dominates, but productivity in many services proves hard to improve. Care work, retail, and hospitality involve direct human interaction that resists automation or efficiency gains. These sectors employ millions, but struggle to generate the value added that supports higher wages. The public sector faces unique pressures. Years of budget constraints mean fewer staff doing more work. Recruitment and retention crises emerge as private sector opportunities offer better pay and conditions. The NHS reports record vacancy rates while demand for services grows. Education loses experienced teachers who simply can't afford to stay in the profession. Young workers particularly struggle. Graduate jobs that once guaranteed middle-class living standards now barely cover rent and student loan repayments. House prices relative to earnings reach levels that make ownership impossible for most. That generational contract, where each generation does better than the last, completely broken. The government points to record employment rates as evidence of economic success. With unemployment of 4.4% and 75.1% of working-age people in employment, Britain has essentially full employment. But this hides what kind of work people actually do. A job isn't automatically a good job. The Resolution Foundation identifies 6.8 million people in severely insecure work. 0-hours contracts, where employers provide no guaranteed hours, leave workers unable to plan their lives. Agency work can disappear without notice. Part-time work when you need full-time hours means permanent financial stress. Self-employment often disguises underemployment. Working poverty has become normalized. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation finds that 68% of working-age adults in poverty live in households where someone works. Food bank usage among employed people rises annually. Teachers, nurses, and other essential workers report skipping meals or choosing between heating and eating. Wealth inequality compounds wage stagnation. Asset prices, particularly housing, rose much faster than wages. Those who owned property before the boom accumulated wealth passively. Those relying on wages alone fell further behind. The divide between those with assets and those without became a chasm that work alone can't bridge. Mental health impacts multiply. Financial stress correlates with anxiety, depression, and relationship breakdown. Children in financially stressed households show worse educational outcomes. The long-term costs of wage stagnation reach far beyond immediate living standards to affect entire generations' life chances. Fixing Britain's wage stagnation requires attacking multiple interconnected problems. Productivity growth must accelerate through higher investment in equipment, infrastructure, and skills. The UK's investment rate needs to rise from the bottom of the G7 to at least the average, requiring billions in additional capital formation annually. Spreading best practices from frontier firms to laggards could boost productivity without new invention. Management quality improvements, digital adoption, and basic operational efficiency could lift the long tail of underperforming businesses. Competition policy should encourage this diffusion rather than protecting incumbents. Trade intensity needs rebuilding to restore competitive pressure and specialization benefits. While rejoining the EU seems politically impossible, Reducing trade frictions through closer alignment or mutual recognition agreements could help. The OBR's 15% trade intensity loss represents enormous foregone prosperity. Labour market institutions need rebalancing. Forget returning to 1970s-style industrial relations, but workers need meaningful voice and bargaining power. Sectoral wage boards, stronger enforcement of employment rights, and portable benefits could help without sacrificing flexibility. Public investment must increase substantially. Infrastructure, from transport to digital networks to energy systems, provides the foundation for private sector productivity. The state can't squeeze public investment forever to reduce borrowing. Eventually, the deteriorating capital stock undermines growth potential. Skills and training require transformation. The current system leaves millions of workers without clear progression paths. Lifelong learning isn't luxury anymore. It's a necessity as technology and trade patterns shift. Funding models need to support continuous upskilling rather than one-off qualifications. Housing costs must fall. When workers spend over half of their income on rent, consumption suffers and labour mobility freezes. Building more homes, particularly social housing, could reduce the largest single cost most workers face. This requires overcoming political resistance from those benefiting from current prices. The national living wage should continue rising, but policy must also support progression beyond minimum wage jobs. In-work training, clear career pathways, and support for job transitions could help workers escape low-wage traps. The goal isn't just any job, but good jobs that provide dignity and opportunity. Other countries show how wage growth works despite similar challenges. Germany's vocational training system creates clear links between education and employment. Nordic countries combine flexibility with security through active labour market policies. Even the United States, despite its inequality, proves tight labour markets can drive wage gains for lower-paid workers. Singapore and South Korea transform their economies within generations through sustained investment in education and infrastructure. Their development strategies prioritize productivity growth through technology adoption and skills development. Britain can't copy their models exactly, but the emphasis on capability building matters. The Netherlands proves part-time work can be high quality rather than precarious. Strong employment protections and proportional benefits mean Dutch workers can reduce hours without sacrificing security. This flexibility benefits both workers and employers when designed properly. France maintains relatively strong wage growth through different institutional choices. Collective bargaining covers most workers even with lower union membership. The state actively shapes wage setting through minimum wage policy and sectoral agreements. While French unemployment exceeds Britain's, employed workers enjoy better conditions. Britain's wage stagnation isn't a complete global anomaly, but it does rank among the worst performances in the developed world. The combination of productivity collapse, investment drought, Brexit disruption, and institutional erosion created a perfect storm that real wages still haven't escaped. While recent gains from national living wage increases and economic recovery brings hope, the fundamental challenges remain. Without dramatic action on investment, productivity, and economic structure, British workers face continued stagnation while their international peers pull ahead. The question isn't whether Britain's experience is unique, but whether it represents the future other countries should avoid or a past Britain can finally leave behind.